This video, we want to talk about the role of the vasa recta. That's these guys over here. These are the peritubular capillaries. They're labeled here, descending and an ascending. The peritubular capillaries of the medulla. So those are generically we call them peritubular capillaries, but specifically they're the vasa recta. Right? And they're peritubular capillaries because they're capillaries that surround the tubules, the nephron. Right? And again, we'll stick with vasa recta because that's the more specific terminology here. Now, we'd have to sort of show how they arise, where they come from, and then why they're arranged the way they are arranged. Okay? So, if we look at a juxtamedullary nephron, that's important. Right, so this is a juxtamedullary nephron we've got drawn here. That's only about 15% of nephrons. Cortical nephrons make up the other 85%. They are the short-looped nephrons, the cortical ones. And they're efferent arterioles, right? We're showing the efferent arteriole coming out here. In the cortex, those efferent arterioles just turn into like cortical peritubular capillaries. They're just a big mesh or network of capillaries that sort of provide for the reabsorption and secretion that's happening from those cortical nephrons, from the segments of the cortical nephron. In a juxtamedullary nephron, right, our glomerulus sits really low in the cortex, right? The PCT and the DCT are up here in the cortex. Cheating a little bit here for lack of space. But only the loop sticks down in the medulla, and it sticks down really far. And then a collecting duct, of course, of all nephrons has to run down, right? Because the exit from the bottom of the papilla is way down here at the bottom, right? Urine's going to drip out the bottom here of the papilla of the medulla. Now, so we've got these long loop nephrons, and as we said in the previous video, right, the loop of Henle is a countercurrent multiplier that is generating a solute gradient. Let's add it here. Right? And it's actually already over here on the far right, but let's put it in here as well. Right? So we got solute coming out of the ascending limb of Henle, and it's creating this gradient where we have very high solute density in the interstitium the deeper we go. Right? And as we've said previously, that provides for water reabsorption from the descending limb of Henle, right? Descending flow is going down here. In the ascending limb, that's where we're adding these. That's where these solutes are coming from, right? Most of them, not quite all, right? We're adding them, and it's not focal. It's a continuum here. I'm just drawing it in 4 different spots. But our solute transporters in the ascending limb of Henle are generating this corticomedullary solute gradient. And again, as we said in a previous video, that's all about helping to drive water movement, right? So this is the sodium and chloride, right, to form this interstitial solute content here. But that's going to provide the driving force to pull water out of the collecting duct, right? So hopefully all this is a review. And again, under the influence of ADH, right, which is going to give us our aquaporins required to allow that water to escape the collecting duct to be reabsorbed. Okay, great. Well, we're reabsorbing like some very significant fraction of sodium and chloride and water from the loop of Henle, right? And then over here at the collecting duct, we're reabsorbing more water. Where does it go? It goes into the vasa recta. Okay, so the vasa recta are the peritubular capillaries derived from the efferent arterioles. Here's our efferent flow, right? And it's a capillary bed, so there's branching. Right? But they're going to enter these descending vasa recta, right? And they're going to come down, and what's going to happen is, don't ignore these arrows for just a second, we're going to pick up a lot of the solute and water that's being reabsorbed. That actually helps explain why we have 3 ascendings and only 1 descending here, and that's arbitrary. But what I'm trying to point out is that there's more ascending flow than descending flow because of picking up, right, this extra volume from the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. Okay? So that makes sense. Now, capillaries, like as a general rule, capillaries exist to sort of deliver oxygen and nutrients and remove waste and all that. And the vasorector, they have to serve that purpose. But think about this for just a minute. We generated this gradient over here, and let's have this capillary just sort of like leave at the bottom here. Maybe I should do that in red. Right? If our capillary bed, came down in here and then did this, it just sort of like left the kidney through this alternate pathway and didn't come back up. What would happen, if you look at remember, capillaries are passively permeable to everything except cells and proteins. And so as we went down, right, let me add my gradient over here. I'm just adding it in another spot. Same gradient. I'm just being redundant here. Right? As we went down, which way would solute, right? So here it comes. It's coming in at 300 milliosmoles per liter. Well, the interstitium is going from 300, 400, 500, 600, right, 900, possibly up to 1,200 is sort of the maximum. So there's a gradient for solute to enter the vasorecta, right? Actually, here you have it. The solute is coming in to the vasorecta. In addition, we would have water leaving. Water would tend to move out towards this solute, right? H2O coming out because it's osmotically being pulled out. That's happening, right? And here it is. Here's that water leaving, right? The descending vasorecta. Well, think about that. We just removed the solute and added water. We basically just wiped out the gradient that the loop of Henle just created. And if our blood were to leave down here at the bottom, that's what you would do. You would deliver your oxygen and nutrients and obliterate what the loop of Henle just did, right? Which we said is really important for water conservation. So that arrangement doesn't work. So in reality, what we have, right, so this doesn't exist. And what we have is a system where we have countercurrent flow between the descending coming down and the ascending vasorecta going up. And so think about it. As we came down, we added solute and removed water. Look at the osmolarity on the inside of the blood here, right? Solute moved in, right? This was moving in, and the water was moving out. Makes it more and more and more concentrated. See the numbers rising here all the way down to about 1,200 again as a maximum, right? Because it's going to come very close to equilibrium with the interstitium. So let's call it 1,200. On the way back up, check it out. On the way back up, it said countering a lower osmolarity, right? It didn't, in one pass down here, it didn't remove all the solute. But on the way back up, check it out. This 1,200 on the inside is now going to be higher than what it is on the outside, right? The 1,200 falls to, 1,100, right? And then 1,000, and then 900, right? So it's going lower and lower as we go up towards the cortex again. And so now we have a gradient for the solute to move out and the water to move in on the way up, right? Because it's saltier on the inside, so the water's going to move in and the solute's going to move out, again, because it's permeable to both of those things. These capillaries are. And so look at this. Look at what's going on here. Our solute is going this way, right? Oops, I have to stop there, right? And our water is going this way. So the water's coming out and then going back in, and the solute's coming in and then going back out, right? In other words, the sum effect here is what happens on the way down is undone on the way back up. So it's sort of like the vasorecta. Pick up the gradient and put it back down. And pick it up, put it back down. Pick it up, put it back down. It basically leaving it alone, not eliminating it the way our sort of like non-adaptive blood flow pattern down here would have done, right? This is called, important term, a countercurrent exchanger. It's this passive exchange between the descending and the ascending that sort of picks up solute and puts it back down and picks up, loses water and pulls it back in, right? Essentially leaving everything exactly as it was. That's absolutely essential to the maintenance of the interstitial gradient created by the loop of Henle, which, again, going backwards, is really important to water conservation over here at the collecting duct, right? Remember, this gradient that we've got out here is driving, I already drew it once, right, is driving our water reabsorption at the collecting duct. Really important for minimizing urine volume, allowing us to excrete a small volume and therefore have to replace it with a relatively small volume through our diet, which is good. There's one downside to this system. This is called countercurrent trapping, where this stuff is sort of like going around and around. It's like caught in an eddy down here, going back and forth between the descending and ascending vasa recta. And that's that the oxygen is coming in at relatively high content, right? Coming in through into the capillary at higher oxygen, and is adjacent to low oxygen. So here the O2 is high O2, and over here after the capillary it would be low O2. Well, we just put them right next to each other, and so we have a gradient for oxygen to diffuse from one side to the other. Some of it's going down here, yeah, and some of it doesn't diffuse out, but some does. And what that does is it makes the deep in the renal medulla fairly hypoxic, meaning low oxygen. So it makes the kidney very sensitive to reduced blood flow, reduced oxygenation. Ooh, it's a good place to put EPO secretion, right? Remember erythropoietin that's sensitive to hypoxia, right? So we've got this tissue that's really hypoxia sensitive because it's not getting as much oxygen as it might in a different arrangement of capillaries. And so the kidneys are actually really sensitive. If you end up with reduced cardiac output because of let's say a heart problem, sometimes the kidneys will struggle, following that because they've been hypoxic for too long, and you'll get, some of the cells will die, the nephron cells will die. The kidney can regenerate a lot of that, but sometimes, it takes a pretty good hit, and you end up in what's called acute renal failure, where the kidneys aren't functioning to their needed level. Okay. Key points, right? The Lupa-Henle is a countercurrent multiplier that creates the corticomedullary solute gradient that is really important for water conservation by the kidney as a whole, but specifically at the collecting duct, where ADH is giving us water permeability, right? Previous video. And the vasa recta are providing oxygen and nutrients and picking up everything that these deep nephron segments are reabsorbing, but they need to do it without screwing up the corticomedullary solute gradient over here. And to do so, they're arranged in this countercurrent fashion. It's called a countercurrent exchanger because it's passive, which allows it to sort of pick things up and put them back down and leave them right where they are. Okay? Now, last thing I'll say is this gradient, the magnitude of this gradient varies depending upon need, essentially. And need is determined by how well hydrated you are. So if you're very well hydrated, the flow through these vasa recta will be higher and you'll have more washout. In other words, this gradient gets washed out a little bit more. But you don't need a big gradient if you're super well hydrated. In other words, you don't need to conserve a lot of water over here at the collecting duct. It's okay. Whereas if you're dehydrated, right, your blood flow here would be lower, your gradient would be washed out less. You'd end up with these maximum numbers of 1,200, in which case your urine volume will be very small and very concentrated. Remember, it has a potential to come close to equilibrating with this, and urine concentration, I should say, will be very high, while its volume would be very low. Right, pulling water out effectively is what makes the concentration rise dramatically. Okay, there we have it, vasa recta.